detached witnessing can be a way of staying safe from fully actually feeling and experiencing. Because if I'm simply witnessing from a distance as a subject, the object of sensation, there's a kind of dualistic split there that's keeping me safe from actually fully experiencing it.
Deeper work is to get to know these implicit relational knowings, these core beliefs that drive most of our symptoms and our patterns.
Yep.
And you can't just meditate them away. You're kind of awakening up, but you're kind of fostering that detachment and that almost reinforcing dissociation. People you'll get a sense that they're not fully present at an emotional level. There's a sense that they feel disconnected and disembodied, and confused about their psychological self.
You know, like that attitude of this is illusion. It was an attitude of, I don't want this, you know, go away. Like, and there's this kind of imprint of this wounded, like, little child inside of me that's just wanting to be embraced, you know, that unmet developmental need that's living inside my nervous system.
Conversation with both of you is like just pure gold. So, hi everyone. Today I'm super happy to have two returning champions, Noel Haarburger and Matt Kay. We're coming together to talk about topics that I sometimes cover on the channel that have to do with awakening and healing, and especially the whole subject of going into the body and how basically each of those things has various traps. So not just the somatic stuff, but also the spiritual practice related stuff that can serve as a way to really just continue take us away from the experience versus actually meeting what is. So we will attempt to basically cover at least some of those things that may be the kind of traps that are really useful to notice. So hi, Noel and Matt.
Hi, nice to be here. Yeah.
They're both experts, unlike myself, to actually talk about these things because Noel is a psychologist, psychotherapist. He's a Gestalt therapist, and he's also involved. He's also embodied processing trainer, and Matt happens to be the co-founder of the Center of Healing, co-creator of the Center for Healing and the embodied processing modality. So I couldn't ask for two better people who also have been on a journey of awakening, so we can kind of weave the two. I mean, it's just such a, treat. Thank you both for doing this.
Thanks for having us, Maggie.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Right. So actually, I think I know where I want to start, because when Matt was a guest on the channel recently, we didn't manage to go into a particular thing that he mentioned in another conversation, in another interview. And it had to do with, I actually wrote it down, bypassing thoughts to get into the body. So I would love you to elaborate on what that means, what that's like.
Sure. So it's interesting because and we spoke about this in the last conversation, how relentless the mind is. And so if we're essentially moving attention towards something, say the body, we're moving attention away from something else, and so in my own experience, just through investigation, and this kind of happened many years ago, that there'd be all these kind of like fucked up thoughts like in my mind, ones that like you really kind of don't want to be thinking, like the ones that just exist in the unconscious, like in the individual and collective unconscious, and they can evoke shame, or fear of the thoughts, like, oh my God, I can't think that, what if I do like act that out or something like that, and so there can be real fear and resistance to those images and words in our mind. And I noticed, oh, wow, it's the thought behind that thought that I don't want to be thinking that then makes me go down into the body to avoid looking at it, And so in that way, I'm actually repressing, So going into the body then becomes an act of resistance. It becomes an act of repression. And so I really noticed that. And it is so relentless and so subtle, but like the process of allowing everything to be as it is, includes thoughts. And for something to really move through the body and kind of discharge itself from the nervous system, we
Mm-hmm.
need both the somatic felt sense able to express itself and the psychological narrative to come up and be seen and acknowledged and
Mm-hmm.
experienced. Wow. And that kind of, it's an upward rising, like it rises down from the viscera and the lower kind of survival areas and up into the frontal cortex and becomes the kind of narrative, and we get the images and the words and like the expression kind of in the conceptual dimension, and
Mm-hmm.
that's it coming out, But if we try and get away from anything, any aspect of that experience, it's inhibiting that natural flow of up and out, and things
Mm-hmm.
don't actually release. And I noticed like everything that I would look away from, because essentially it's saying no to it. Everything I say no
Yep.
to, try to resist and move towards something else because I don't want
Yep.
that. I'm always pulled back into it. Like, nah, you can't do that. Like, if you want to actually move through this, all of it
Uh-huh.
has to be experienced as it is.
Mm. Yeah, I was just also reminded of, which is, it doesn't happen a lot, but it can happen, that some folks go into their body to the sensation level in order to not be with their emotions, which it doesn't happen a lot, but it can be a way to quickly regulate yourself. Like, because when we often track sensations, it supports regulation. And so some people will move away from their emotion by going into the sensation to prematurely regulate so they don't have to sit with the emotion too much. So it's ironically, sometimes that's a trap to get away from feeling emotions and maintaining emotional disconnection by fixating on sensations. So it's a challenge. Like we've got to find a balance between staying regulated enough to be present to our experience, but not over regulating so that we move away from our experience.
This is
Yeah.
this is why it's such a fascinating subject to explore because, you know, I bet even people who watch my videos, you know, they're even fed up of me saying, you have to go into the body, you know, you have to be in the body with the
Yeah, yeah,
experience, you know, and I
yeah,
genuinely mean it, you know, and I go on about it because it was such a massive part of the journey and quite literally in many ways gateway to all the other shifts,
for
right?
sure.
So you know, this is why I see why this is important. But then I start talking to people about their various experiences, like for example Vipassana to me, and I
Mm.
suppose I wonder whether you're maybe referring to this and whether you two could talk a little bit about that, because to me it also sounds like it relates to some of the things where actually scanning the sensations becomes a way to avoid emotions. I'm not here to criticize Vipassana, or like don't do
Mm.
Vipassana. No, because I think every practice has its benefit and its traps. So can you kind of talk about both a little bit?
Okay. No, you've done Vipassana, so you start off.
Yeah, I've done a couple of Vipassana retreats, and it was actually the benefit of it for me, because I was very much up until I did Vipassana, I was very much intellectualizing everything, and
Mm-hmm.
emotions and my body was split off and undercoupled, and I was over identified with my mind. So learning to build my interoceptive capacity to track my sensations was really helpful for me, and it gave me confidence that I can be with unpleasant experiences without needing to run away, because I had to over and over again just be with pain in my
Right.
leg, pain in my back. Sometimes emotional pain came up for periods, and terror. I went through some periods of terror as my ego started to kind of dissolve.
Mm-hmm.
So it can be beneficial, but it depending on the person. People, the human mind is so good at finding ways to avoid experience. Like we are so skilled at that, right? And so we can use Vipassana by going into the body, we, as you just mentioned, we can use that as a way of bypassing staying with the yuckiness of emotion by just, I'm going to ignore that emotion by going right into the sensation, just scanning the sensations in a detached, impersonal way. And
Right.
it can down regulate the emotion and cut it off potentially. And that's the danger of doing Vipassana, is that it can reinforce emotional bypassing. For some people, not for everyone, but for some people, I think those who already have a predisposition towards dissociation or emotional bypassing, their mind can utilize the Vipassana technique to
Mm-hmm.
continue to escape and move away from sensations, or even meaning making, like you were saying, Matt. Some people go into the body to avoid facing unpleasant, difficult thoughts. So
Mm.
the thoughts get undercoupled and split off. And I think people can use Vipassana to not have to do any self inquiry, because you just go straight, I'm just going to observe that sensation. That's all I have to do. And it can shut down self inquiry and self investigation, which is often also needed to really process our emotions and our trauma. We have to do some self inquiry. And
Mm-hmm.
Vipassana and a lot of meditation techniques don't necessarily teach self inquiry, they just teach you to develop, develop a detached observer. And that can be a trap in kind of stopping us from healing trauma.
Just like
Does
to
that make
add
sense?
that totally, and
Totally.
to add, it's infinite in the sense, like in the ways that the mind can try to
Yeah,
avoid bypass
yeah, yeah,
experience, like
yeah.
infinite. And it's
Infinite.
like there's various traps at various stages, as well, because
Right.
it's like, and depending like on how traumatized we are and the developmental history that we have in our childhood and the ways our ego structure kind of adapted to survive and its own particular coping strategies. And this is why there's never a one size fits all solution. And it's like, because everyone has to inquire into their own mind and the way their own mind is structured, because it's like a fingerprint. Everyone's is different. And it's like Vipassana and things like that, like what can happen, especially if there's trauma in the system, the kind of detached witnessing can be a way of staying safe from fully actually feeling and experiencing. Because if I'm simply witnessing from a distance as a subject, the object of sensation, there's a kind of dualistic split there that's
Yeah,
keeping me
split.
safe from actually fully experiencing it. I'm
Yep.
not feeling it from within it. And
Mm,
so,
mm.
like, and what can happen as well is there can become like a fixation on sensation, because people with a lot of trauma can, their bodies have been so stuck in fight or flight and survival for so long that when they start to become aware of sensation, the sensations can be so intense that they become hyper fixated on it,
Yep.
sort of, and it creates this feedback loop, between that fixation of the observer and the sensation itself. And it can
Mm-hmm.
perpetuate that sense of threat, because it's like the witness becomes fixated on the sensation because the sensation itself feels threatening and it keeps itself at a distance from it. So that creates a
So
kind
it's
of
almost like they
survival.
become hyper vigilant to their
Hyper
sensations. Is
vigilant,
that what you're saying?
exactly, yeah,
Yeah.
hyper vigilant. And
Mm.
um, there's various different traps at various like
Stages.
stages of awakening. Like I
Yep.
know for ages I would stay in sensation, but it's like when the body is felt like it's made of pure consciousness, and it's
Mm-hmm.
empty, like it's made of that same substance, that same presence, and consciousness kind of descends into it. It's like you get an emotion, and then its kind of attention will just go to the very center of it and feel the emotion is empty. And it's a way of not fully experiencing the emotion. What I found is like trauma doesn't move through when you're doing that,
Yep.
because it's so there's various dimensions and various levels of reality that we can experience things on, and then we can actually use this one to avoid this one and this one to avoid this one. And like it's like, as we said last time, it's relentless in its quest to
Mm.
escape.
It's
And we're
absolutely
endlessly,
relentless. Yeah.
Yeah.
yeah,
Yep. And
yeah.
and like you said, I think to me this is like obviously we're just touching the surface because honestly we could do a whole series of how I'm not suggesting that we do, by the way. Don't freak out. By the way. But honestly, if we really sat down like with it, and we could do a whole series of how the mind basically co-opts anything, anything that even on the surface looks nothing like resistance. In fact, it looks like the opposite. Both of you know that I don't know much about spirituality, but or the spiritual practices, but often when I hear people talk about detachment, you know, to me, it often sounds like disassociation, like something like what you've just described.
Non-attachment is like not grasping at a particular outcome. Non-attachment is a kind of allowing everything to be as it is. Detachment is a kind of stepping back out of experience.
Right. I
And
see.
like there's a place for that, like there definitely is, like, we can step back as the I into that sense of witnessing
Mm-hmm.
presence. And
Mm-hmm.
then, that gives the opportunity of space from the object, space from the form. We've stepped out of existence or the form into a kind of non-existence, into the formless dimension, into emptiness. And we can kind of remain there as the I. And that can give the opportunity to look and see, oh, wow, there's the I is empty.
Right.
And so it
Right.
can be part of the inquiry process. It's like, can be a phase, like they call it transcendence. We've moved beyond time and space, and
Mm-hmm.
outside of existence and kind of watching phenomena from a dissociated place. That phase is not an issue, and a lot of people need to go through that phase as part of their process. Not everyone
Mm-hmm.
does, but the issue is when we stay there or get stuck there, or it becomes a form of escape to try and keep away from the human experience because
Yeah.
it's too messy.
I'm a student of the diamond approach, and they talk about the journey of ascent and the journey of descent. And the
Mm-hmm.
journey of ascent is that movement towards recognizing the absolute dimensions, the formless, the sky-like nature of the mind, and recognizing that the content of experience comes and goes and doesn't really define you. And that's an important stage of spiritual development, to kind of recognizing that your true identity as consciousness. And that can give enormous peace and freedom and recognition that you're not your stories. And for someone who's highly traumatized, that realization can really help them, like to
Yeah.
recognize I'm not my trauma. I mean, I experience trauma, but I'm not defined by it.
Yeah.
So the journey of ascent can be very helpful, but if you just stay there, like Matt's saying, you can stay stuck in the transcendent dimension, and it can reinforce, especially if someone's already good at dissociating, it can kind of compound the dissociation the person's already developed and perpetuate a subtle dualistic split between the witness and the experience, as Matt's nicely saying. But Almas also talks about the journey of descent. And the journey
Mm-hmm.
of descent is coming down into the body and integrating the human dimension,
Mm-hmm.
integrating our trauma, coming into the body and doing the work of growing up, not just waking up. And he
Mm-hmm.
says you need to do both journeys to become a complete human being. And not everyone completes that second journey, the journey of descent. They hide out in the journey of ascent. And you can have an awakening at the head center level, where your head wakes up, where you realize the sky-like nature of the mind, but the heart hasn't woken up and the belly center hasn't woken up. And in the
Yeah.
diamond approach, we talk about that true waking up is waking up the heart, waking up the belly, not just having a head center realization, which can be foster detachment and dissociation if it's just at that level.
I think what I find so utterly fascinating, and so this is probably going to be another question, which is that after my first, let's call it awakening, which I would now, if we use this reference point, awakening of the mind, heart, and God, the awakening of the mind, that's where I got stuck for years. mostly because I
Right.
genuinely didn't know any better. So everything was just a story, you know, everything,
That's right. I remember you shared. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. So basically, any time, because the discomfort massively started coming up to the surface, and as soon as the discomfort was coming up, I was like, oh, it's just a thought, it's just a thought, or it's just a story or illusion or whatever. And this now, so this is to me the most fascinating thing that what was once a profound, genuine insight now is co-opted by the mind and actually now starts to serve as a coping mechanism, you know? And that
Yeah.
went on for
Uh-huh.
years. But
Right.
if you had met me at the time, you'd probably see a very similar person to what you're seeing now. Like, ha ha ha, you know, like my no, you know, my normal usual sort of
Lovely.
self, bubbly self most of the time. I mean, I was either like that or I was like down in hell, you know, it was in and out basically for years. And like not wanting to like be here basically anymore. But but if you had asked me, are you okay? You know, like, like let's say even when I was upset or not upset, like even when I was like deeply depressed, actually, you know. But if you had asked me, are you okay? I'd be like, of course I'm okay, right? Because I was responding from that wholeness, oh, you know, fundamental okayness that first
Mm-hmm.
awakening led to seeing sort of not from what I was experiencing, not from what was my human experience. You
Yeah.
see?
Totally.
So so therefore I was deeply suffering and I had no idea that I was suffering because I was
Mm-hmm.
completely disassociated from it.
Mm.
So but if you had told me at the time, Maggie, like you're disassociated, you know, like this, or whatever, I'd be like, what are you on
What?
about? You with your psychology and your bullshit theories, you know, and like whatever, you know, in my on my worst day, I would probably say something like that. I can be asshole, believe me, I can do that too. So so my question is, how is there any way to spot that? Is there a way to for people to actually see whether they're actually disassociating, whether this is through various practices or, you know, escaping to the body or whatever,
Mm.
you know, yeah. Sorry for a long-winded kind of intro, but yeah, to this
No,
question.
I relate.
Not at all.
Um, I heard Adya once say, I think it was in an interview with Locke Kelly, he talked about similar thing, spending a long time in like a profound, what he called spiritual dissociation.
Mm-hmm.
And when he said that, like I really resonated with it. And everything you just said. And I think it follows typical themes, like I did the same thing, like it's illusion, it's a
Mm-hmm.
story, don't believe it, blah 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 blah. And it was a way of kind of pushing myself further, the I, not
Mm-hmm.
Matt with the story of Matt, but the I, pushing the I further away and further away. And it's kind of negation,
Yep.
it's like netty netty as the practice, different ways
Mm-hmm.
of that. And that, like I said, that was needed because it was kind of like abiding, it was stabilizing it, in that sense of kind of separating the subjectivity from its hypnotism with the kind of concepts and images and self-images of the mind. It was kind of bringing it back so it could kind of stand alone,
So it
And
kind of
so that was
supported disidentification in that sense.
yeah, 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 exactly. But it became dissociation when it's kind of like used as an avoidance mechanism, as a way of escaping feeling and the humanity of life, a way of staying outside of life. And it's essentially what I was speaking about at the start, just in a different way, like
Mm-hmm.
the movement away from thoughts, because I don't want to look at those thoughts down to sensation. So it's just a movement of attention. And if like dissociation, it simply means I have removed attention from that aspect of my experience. It's
Yeah.
become dissociated, fragmented off, and I no longer look at it. It's not a part of me anymore. And so we can do that in any way. That movement of attention, like that's what we need to notice. And we spoke about this in the previous interview because it's like like if we're stuck in emptiness and are doing that, like what can we do to kind of get out of it? Like now I need to kind of get away from emptiness, and it's kind of like, oh no, like, and so like we end up in this self-perpetuating loop of now this is the problem, and like, whereas it's just actually about noticing what we're doing, really seeing, oh wow, yeah, like I'm hiding out, it's an escape. It's an escape, a trap door at the back of my existence that I can kind of jump through and hide there, because I don't want to feel. And it's interesting because that mechanism of attention pushing and pulling away from one thing, trying to get towards something else. Um, it's like if we're constantly referencing emptiness, to
Yep.
try and get away from the rest of experience, we're inhibiting the natural flow of awakening because there's a natural descent that happens. It starts to come down itself, like, and start to experience itself, in within the body and wake up within the human.
Mm-hmm.
But we're kind of sabotaging and preventing that from happening by constantly trying to stay there, and that's how we know, like, it's the mind, because there's effort, there's efforting to it. It's a kind of like, for periods it's a struggle, when
Yep.
things were really intense. It's like you have to kind of struggle and negate every thought that comes up just to stay like away from it all. And like eventually we kind of, we get humbled, like, that's been
Big
my
time.
yeah, that's been my process. It's like, because I'd hear this and I'd hear teachers talk about like don't get stuck in emptiness. Rarely, most of them are talking about like getting stuck in emptiness, but saying it's liberation, and I'd hear like, a few
That's a
talk about
good one.
like,
Exactly. Yeah.
yeah, I'd
Mm-hmm.
hear some teachers talk about like don't get stuck in emptiness,
Mm-hmm.
and I'd hear that, but it wouldn't land. And then even like, when it would like trying to get out of that, it's like can't, but then eventually it's like the struggle dances out its dance, and you just give
Mm.
up. Like
Mm-hmm.
that mechanism exhausts itself. It's like those Chinese finger
Oh,
traps, and then relax and they come out. And so it's kind of like, well, like the bad news is that there's nothing you can do, like, because anything you do perpetuates it. But like just seeing how
Yeah.
we're doing it, like really, really seeing it. And if we've got trauma and significant trauma, like, the it can really be driving that escape mechanism,
Totally.
and so really seeing my trauma, like really seeing it clearly, and seeing that's what I was escaping, and kind of understanding trauma and what it was. And it kind of started to let soften the fear of the mind of it, because so much of my fear was unconscious. And, starting to learn to kind of dip my toe in, titrate, kind of in and out bit by bit, and create a sense of safety. And like even just realizing, like, wow, like my whole system's just perceives threat everywhere,
Yeah.
and not even knowing that previously, just
Yeah.
seeing that, like all these kinds of details and nuances of my experience, it slowly starts to kind of open it up, and we, start to, feel like we start to get out of the way, and we start to feel more safe to allow experience to be as it is, because
Mm-hmm.
allowing experience to be as it is giving up control. And essentially, it's all included already. It's just this movement of attention that disincludes things.
Yeah.
Just gonna say we learn to allow more and more, because that movement away from something, away movement of attention, whether it's to emptiness or whatever, is an act of non-allowance.
Mm-hmm.
mm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was just remembering. I guess I could probably speak for my personal experience about this question around how do you tell the difference between
Yeah. Brilliant.
awakening and dissociation, because sometimes they can mimic each other if on a surface level, right? And what I experienced after my first Vipassana retreat is I had a head center awakening where I had a very deep experience of just realizing I'm not my thoughts. And I think you've talked about that one too, right? And I remember at the time I was also doing Gestalt group therapy, luckily. But anyway, I came back from that and I tried to explain to my Gestalt group that my neurosis has fallen away and how great that was. And they looked at me like, God, Noel's deluded again. So we're on a completely different wavelength. But I seriously did have an experience of liberation from my neurosis for a while, and I felt very free. But there was a subtle dissociation that went along with that. And the way I could tell was I was still emotionally detached. I didn't have a great deal of emotional warmth. I wasn't connected to my body. And I didn't have a great deal of clarity about my psychological issues. Like I had clarity around I'm not my thoughts, and that gave a certain clarity of mind. And I realized I think I need to do some personal work. Like I could intuitively sense that the Vipassana work was actually reinforcing detachment. And I could see that in some of the other students who spoke in a very detached kind of impersonal way, and it was not very relational. So I just made the decision to stop doing retreats, and I went and did Gestalt. And I had a whole lot of issues, rage against my dad, grief about my childhood, unprocessed terror and rage and grief. And over those 2 years, and a lot of shame, a lot of deep shame. And over those 2 years, I worked on that. So I kind of went in more the journey of descent.
Yep.
And I think one of the ways that I can tell the difference now is that I feel like I'm more in my heart. I feel a lot of warmth towards people and at times towards myself. I feel more embodied, more connected, and able to be in relationship. And if you're kind of awakening up, but you've kind of fostering that detachment and that almost reinforcing dissociation, people you'll get a sense that they're not fully present at an emotional level. There's a sense that they feel disconnected and disembodied, and confused about their psychological self. There won't be much clarity around what they feel and what their psychological issues are, how their childhood conditioning impacted on them, because all of that gets bypassed. And I can feel the difference between someone who's done that growing up work compared to just the waking up work, because they're some of the qualities that I would see. That's what I noticed in myself prior to doing psychological work. I didn't have warmth. I was disembodied. I was in my head. I thought I was really had my shit together, because I wasn't my thoughts, and that gave me almost a bit of spiritual pride. I had some good old spiritual pride about that. Everyone else is so deluded. I'm not.
They're all caught up in their stories, you know what I mean? And they should just get over it. Yeah.
They're caught in Mara. They're just stuck
So
in
much,
Mara.
so much compassion. You know what I mean?
So much.
Overwhelming. No, thank you
Overwhelming.
so much. Thank you so much for sharing this, because I think that this is, gosh, I have a feeling that there will be lots of people actually who watch, videos on the channel that will be able to completely relate to this, because I think that is something that happens at all stages in a certain
Yeah.
in various stages. So it's funny because we actually share precisely the same experience, that it happened after the insight that I'm not my thoughts, right? The thing is that you were lucky for some reason,
For some
you
reason.
know, that, and thank God for that, that you had that insight, that you went into the psychology, and you went on to do the work. Whereas if at that very point I met you and you said to me, Maggie, perhaps we should look at a bit of trauma, or some wounds or childhood and everything, I would be like, just bugger off. You know what I mean? Like, why would I want to dwell in the story? Like, why you're, because
That's
to
right.
me, the therapy again or anything to do with psychology was just like, well, I will just go into the mind and the mind will create some story, then I will then dwell on for no reason. And it's like, and but it was like, I genuinely saw things like that. It's not that I didn't think that I was dismissive. I was just like, that's genuinely what that looked like. So therefore, there was absolutely no point to go into the story. So maybe it's a good segue to explore when actually going to the story is absolutely useful. Can you to see this, to
Mm.
even identify the story and see that story actually, especially if it's still alive and plays out say in a form of belief that then affects how we operate, let's say in our relationships. Yeah, can we, does it make sense what I'm saying here?
Yeah, 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 for
Yeah,
sure.
yeah, 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 it
Okay.
does. Yeah, I'll let Matt go for it
N-
first because I just did a bit of a spiel.
So, in my experience is like, from that place of like, empty, detached witnessing, like everything you're saying's true. It's like, it
mhm,
reminds me of what Maharishi said, that truth is different in different
mhm,
states of consciousness. Like it is true that everything's illusion, in
Mm.
but from the vantage point, from that vantage point, it's like everything is illusion.
mhm.
Like the world was just a big mind-made story, fantasy concept, like it doesn't actually exist. And from that standpoint, it's true. And that makes it all even more self-affirming, of why it's like I'm gonna stay here. And
And the other one is
like,
it's impermanent. That's another common one. Like
yeah, yeah, impermanent.
it's
Yeah.
impermanent. So
Yeah.
just don't bother with it. It's impermanent.
Yeah, exactly. I really used to use that. It's not real, it's illusion.
Uh,
That was one for me. It's like a coping strategy. But, like from the standpoint of like the human experience, from that vantage point, like it's completely real. And like when the two come together, it's like, oh wow, they're not actually separate at all. Anyway. It's like as Ramana, that quote from Ramana Maharshi is like, the world is illusion, Brahman alone is real.
Yeah.
Like dot dot dot. The world is Brahman. It's like, how do you wrap your head around that? Like it's like you just said the world's illusion. But it's like you kind of wake up to that empty space and then look and you start to see more and more that what you woke up from is actually it as well. And so, that duality starts to collapse between the two. And, the story, it's like that dismissive attitude, that attitude of rejection, negation is essentially a rejection. It's like those childhood wounds that, lived inside of me that I spent my whole life running from, with my addiction and everything that I went through. I they were based on rejection, parts of myself that society rejected, that my environment rejected, that my parents rejected, that, it was rejected, it was
Yeah.
said no to, you're not allowed to have that part. And what was I doing? I was rejecting it. I was doing the very same thing to these parts that created them. And so, we talk about like awakening and love and compassion and blah blah blah, like they all go together. But from this space, like it was an act of complete abandonment and rejection. Like that attitude of this is illusion. It was an attitude of I don't want this, go away. Like, and there's this kind of imprint of this wounded, like little child inside of me that's just wanting to be embraced, that unmet developmental need that's living inside my nervous system, inside my body. And I'm just like, no, like, and so it was perpetuating the wound and, like learning to kind of touch on it and actually feel it and stay with it and not bolt off the other way, and to stay with that pain. It's the gap started to close between the two. And in that, like the story itself, like really had to be acknowledged. It had to be felt as a truth, not just called false, not called illusion. It needed to be actually felt as in felt experience. as a truth, that yeah, I have this wound and it fucking hurt, it
Yeah.
hurts like that happened. And through that kind of ability to own it and be honest, because that's what we're kind of talking about here is getting honest with ourselves. And that capacity to start to get honest about these things, it started to close that gap, that dissociative gap. And this happened organically just by seeing all the ways that I was lying to myself and escaping. And that's what helped the wounds start to metabolize, and so the story was allowed, still now, when there's a story, it's like, it's allowed to be experienced, like it's a part of experience. It's not some other mistake that, is unspiritual and not awakened and blah, blah, blah. But it's more and more and more like, and I think it's infinite to the degree that wholeness can be whole. It's always that process now of inclusion, rather than escape.
Yeah. Yeah, gosh, that's like honestly, this conversation with both of you is like just pure gold. Like if I sort of moved in time to when I was, after that I'm not my thought stage and I came across this conversation, I'll be like, well, I don't know. I'm not sure how I would obviously react, but from where I'm looking now, I would have thought, gosh, that would have saved me like a lot of years and like in hell. But so no, and do you want to add to this to what Matt said about the actual value of acknowledging the story?
Yeah, I mean, I loved what Matt just said, and
Mm.
I'd I'd say that like true kind of integrated awakening is a process of moving towards wholeness. And that is a process of transcending and including. Yeah. So inclusion is really important, not just transcending, but coming back and including. And the more you transcend and include, the more you continue to kind of naturally become more whole. And a part of the inclusion process is really, as Matt said, like turning towards our experience and fully understanding it and investigating, inquiring into it. And like we can have a lot of thoughts and realize I'm not my thoughts, and that can be helpful, but a lot of our thoughts exist at the implicit embodied level, that they are non-conscious, implicit, sometimes called implicit relational knowings that are deeply, deeply conditioned and imprinted in the body and the nervous system. And we don't even know we carry these. Like that's very different to surface thoughts, like I should do this or I'm comparing myself to that person. That's almost like just a manifestation of the deeper core beliefs that we don't know we have.
Mm-hmm.
Like for me, my deepest core belief is a sense of deficiency at a very deep implicit level that, I'm not okay. That came out of the result of my history growing up in the cult. The surface manifestation of that was, I should be better, I should be smarter, I should be funnier, I should be more articulate. It's helpful to notice those thoughts and unhook from them and learn how to not pay attention to them. But that only gets me halfway towards a deeper awareness. The deeper work is to get to know these implicit relational knowings, these core beliefs that drive most of our symptoms and our patterns.
Yep.
And you can't just meditate them away. You need to also investigate, what am I believing? What's the deepest belief I have that might be driving my patterns, my fears, my symptoms, and understanding them experientially, not just cognitively, like feeling the feeling of deficiency at a deep level. And when we can do that, or feeling the shame at a deep level, when we can be fully present at that level, that's where the healing work happens. Like, I think experience is naturally self-liberating when we're fully present to it in our bodies. It naturally gets metabolized. But you can't meditate away these core beliefs. They have to
Yep.
be known, integrated, felt. It involves some inquiry work to find out what we are telling ourselves. And that's where we have to be willing to turn towards the truth of our experience and face our pain. And as Matt said, they come up anyway. Like, you can only hide out in spiritual realization for a
For so long.
I mean, you can delude yourself, of course, for a very long period of time, but
Unless you want to live in a cave or something, like if
Yeah.
you want to relate
right,
to humans, it's gonna come.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And one of my clients, I've got a client that she's incredibly very spiritual, very perceptive, and she said this beautiful saying to me today. She said, as the light gets lighter, the dark gets darker." And I think there's a lot of truth in that, the
Yes.
more expanded, the more awakened we get, the more the darkness starts to surface and sometimes gets darker as we move into deeper layers of contraction. And, so
Yeah.
the more we cultivate presence, the more the deeper layers of pain will just naturally surface.
Yep.
And if
Yeah.
we can really be with that and integrate that, then we truly move into a transcendent state where there's no opposites.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
I think false awakening is it's this full of opposites. It's very dualistic, whereas kind of healthy, true awakening, there is no opposites because everything's included and welcomed.
Which is ironically what often is still very much present in many non-dual talks. It's like
Oh, for sure.
it would
For sure.
ironically, I say, because like what sort of non-duality is that? I have no idea what's going on here. But
It's
I think
dualistic
it
non-duality.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
but I think it speaks to both of you. Gosh, thank you so much for this again. Like, I'm just so grateful for this conversation. I can't underline this, but enough. But to the rejected parts that you mentioned, Matt, earlier, and how and really that sort of connects to pretty much shadow work, right? When all this stuff
Yeah.
Yeah,
starts
shadow.
to resurface. And the way I see it anyway is, a belief is a story. A
Mm.
belief is a story, but that story is very much alive in the body. For as long as it's alive in the body,
Exactly.
you can tell yourself it's just a belief or it's just a story multiple times every day for the rest of your life, and it's gonna do not absolutely nothing. It will change nothing. That belief has to be felt as though it is absolutely true, and
Yeah.
which is kind of ironically again, right? So and let the reality of that story play out, which is why, again, I can only speak from what I experienced here, where it was shocking to one of the things that was sort of illuminated through this process was self-hatred, you know. And it was shocking to me because I thought what I always saw as like, sure, I'm insecure about my body, sure, I'm insecure about whatever, sure, yeah, it all sounded like insecurity. So I was completely floored when the massive self-hatred came through. And sorry, I'm just gonna get emotional again because actually residues of that came up recently, believe it or not.
No, I believe it. It's still happening for me.
Woo!
Really.
And
Yeah.
give me a sec.
Take your time. Yeah.
Sorry. And so, before I wouldn't have the capacity to sit with that self-hatred because it was so massive. It was like a tsunami, sort of. I don't know how to,
Yeah.
but it was just like it took over. It just, the self-hatred took over in such a profound way that I couldn't even see myself experiencing self-hatred because the distinction collapsed between, like, there was no me and
Yeah,
the
yeah,
self-hatred.
exactly.
It was just pure self-hatred, kind
And
of,
Yeah.
repression.
right? That's where the story came through as well. Of the little girl that was coming back from school and buying a bag of hot chips, or fries, as other people would say, and starve myself, even though I knew that there was going to be a dinner, but because the situation at home was so tumultuous, you know, and so unpredictable. It was how I was basically soothing myself, really, you know. So that story again, if that came through somehow, the story, or someone suggested, let's go to the little Maggie, let's see what was like going on, you know, when you were growing up. If that came
Yeah.
through at that point when I knew I was not my thoughts and like everything is just a story, I'd be like, seriously, please, you know, what little Maggie and what are you even talking about, you know?
It's kind of like you can experience the energy and the felt sense of the story moving through you, you know, like it's kind of like it's like you and the energy. There's no more separation between it, and it's experienced so fully, like with like a kind of unconditional yes to it, and it
Yep.
moves through, you know, versus stepping away and not experiencing it. Because that's all the mind's trying to do, is not experience usually these deeper kind of wounds, you know. And like you know, just before we hit record, I was just speaking to Maggie, like my dad is in having end of life care at the moment, and I was saying, you know, to Maggie and Noel that like there's all these parts that are coming up like out of my unconscious, like very early parts, like, you know, when a child loses their parent, you know, or the prospect of losing their parent, it's like losing their whole world, you know, and I can just feel these really deep early beliefs kind of moving through, and this kind of existential grief, you know, and like how will I survive like without him? These very deep stories and core beliefs, and the grief like is immense, and I'm sitting crying with like snot coming out and tears like a little baby, you know, like a tiny little
Yep.
child, petrified, like. And you know, but like the capacity and the ability to just allow it like fully, it's like, you know, and then it's like the heart's just wide open, and I can't distinguish between the grief and love anymore, you know, as
Yeah.
it moving through. And you know, so that sense of like the story and the core belief there, it's like you have to experience it. It's, you know, as long as we're pushing it away, you know, for any reason, it's not going anywhere. It just is looping, stuck in the
Yeah.
nervous system. And as Carl Jung
Yeah.
said, you know, the unconscious doesn't care about your happiness. It cares about liberating itself, you know, it cares about completion, was the word he used, you know. And so these parts of us are always trying to complete, you know, they're always trying to move through. And story that like the idea that it's just a story is just another story that we have, you know. And so, you know, if we can start to see the ways that we kind of jump out of experience, like all we're left with in the end is the experience, you
Yep.
know, the current experience, like as it is, you know. And so when we can fully experience, that's what allows these unconscious forces and energies and wounds to complete. And
Yep.
I haven't found an end, you know, at this point. Like I think it just keeps going and going and going and going. Like
Yeah.
uh, yeah.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, there's lots of little pings of what
Right.
Matt's saying. I was thinking of this concept called spiritual materialism by Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche. I may not say it
Mm-hmm.
right, but he
Mm-hmm.
wrote a book called Spiritual Materialism,
Yeah.
and I also think of this concept called psychological materialism. That you know that the mind is just wired to want to feel good, right? To move towards the
Yes.
pleasant, to
Yes.
get rid
Yes.
of the unpleasant. It's biologically wired into us and then culturally reinforced. And so many people will use spirituality to reinforce that impulse to feel better or to feel
Mm-hmm.
happy. And that's nothing wrong with that. That's what the ego tends to do at the beginning of a spiritual journey. It wants to feel better, right? We all want to feel better. But I think as we mature, spiritually mature, we start to cotton on to the idea that maybe I'm using my spirituality just to feel better rather than turn towards the truth of my experience. And then there's a bit of a kind of a deeper maturation where we realize we actually have to go back and turn towards our pain and fully feel it, like Matt's beautifully saying. And that's where the true healing happens. You know, that daggy saying, you've got to feel it to heal it. Well, this, you know, it's a cliche, but there's so much truth in it. And most of the time we're just wanting to feel better. As Michael Brown has this lovely saying, instead of trying to feel better, we need to get better at feeling.
Yeah.
And turning towards the truth of our experience. But sometimes what supports that is to have an awakening experience where we realize we're more than just the contents of consciousness. And there's a lovely saying by Tara Brach, I believe. She says, when you know you're the ocean, the waves are less scary. And sometimes when we know we're the ocean, it gives us the courage to turn towards our pain, knowing that it doesn't define us, which gives us more courage to feel it. And I think it takes a great deal of humility to really turn towards emotional pain, because we really have to let go of control. We really need to let go of an idealized self-image or an ideal place to be and just surrender to the truth of our experience. What's that, Matt?
Like an ideal spiritual state or spiritual
Right.
experience. You know, if we're holding on to any particular spiritual experience,
Ideal.
like it's just a belief in a story that the spiritual is superior to the mundane and the relative anyway. Like,
Yeah.
you know, like animals,
Yeah.
animals don't believe that. That is a conditioned idea, you know, of like
Yeah,
worldly
exactly.
culture.
It's a conditioned concept about what spirituality is, which is about feeling happy and better. And
Yeah, like it's
but the other
superior.
little that's it. But the other little nuance I think that is worth saying is often our beliefs are actually ways to not feel our feelings. So if we go into the belief that I'm a bad person, sometimes that's actually a strategy to not turn towards the felt sense of shame. You know, we go into the story to literally move away from the felt sense. And I think that's the ultimate goal is to recognize the painful story we carry, but then to drop down into the felt sense of where we feel the pain of that in our body, which is often going to show up as feelings of shame or deficiency or worthlessness. And if we can fully feel that, like Matt was saying, being fully present to it, almost merging with it, it's the exact moment when we fully show up to that feeling that healing begins to happen. And the
Yeah.
very quality of presence that we lost touch with, like for me, in my last interview with you, I shared the story of going into this deep grief and feeling of recognizing how profoundly insecure I felt as a person in my life. And I started to sob and I just felt so insecure. And for the first time, instead of fighting it and bypassing it and intellectualizing out of it, I just felt it. And it's almost the moment I felt it, I remember this unexpected feeling of lightness and love and compassion rise up in my heart and fill my whole being. And that just
Naturally.
happened naturally. And I had this realization, it's like, it's this kind of, what's that word when you turn lead into gold? I forget the
Yeah.
word,
Alchemy.
but it's an
Alchemy.
alchemical moment.
Yeah.
And I think that taught me something, that it's only when we are willing to be humble enough to surrender to the true pain of our heart and fully feel it, do we have the gift of true healing. But that
Yeah.
takes enormous courage and humility to
Yeah.
do that.
It's
Yeah.
something that
And yeah,
Sorry,
happens,
go ahead.
yeah.
you know? Like it's something that
And
happens to us.
deconditioning. Yeah.
Like we don't, you know, because it's like, you know, it's like we might hear that and be like, oh, I need to fully feel and try to then fully feel, but
Right. Yeah. Forcing it.
not, yeah, we kind of like, we get there through being humbled, you know? It's like those moments when a feeling is just felt to its core. It's not a doing.
Things that I think I was saying is that all of it is so everything we talked about, all the traps, all the things, they're very much part of the process. And it's very, very innocent happening. So because
Yeah.
there's like we're
Exactly.
already having often we're often already having a really hard time. We really don't need to, on top of all of it, beat ourselves up, or of the fact that, for
Yeah,
example,
yeah.
we can't meet a particular sensation or a particular belief, or we
Yeah.
distract, or in previous, maybe I will link this video because I sort of elaborated on that, where beating ourselves up over the fact that we're still resisting something, or beating ourselves up over the fact that we distracted ourselves yet again with a tub of ice cream, or Netflix, or whatever sedative of choice. It's really innocent, is what I'm trying to say. So, like, just
Yeah.
just wanted to say that. The other thing that came through as I was listening to you guys is the that actually, if you have to s- say out loud that it's just a story, then that alone to me is a kind of an indication that you're pushing that story away. You see? Because if there's no fear of what that story brings up to the surface, right? If it's like the discomfort, then you're just there sitting with the discomfort, right? So I think that this is like one of the, at least now that I go back to my experience of how that was playing out, that as soon as I had to literally tell myself it's just a thought or a story, that was already there, an indication that I was distracting myself. So,
Doing a spiritual bypass.
exactly.
Yeah.
So the telling this was really already the having to tell myself that in and of itself was already telling me I'm now starting to cope with, this is the coping mechanism. This
It's a
is
coping mechanism.
right.
Yeah.
The other thing I want to say, which would have been what came through, just as an example from today, because we talked about disassociation, and for me, that disassociation, and like with you, you both talked about it as well, was fear of emotions. To give you an example of the situation today, where Matt came early to Zoom, and we were chatting before we started recording, and he told me about the situation with his dad, and I found myself like I just wanted to like break. Well, I was sort of, about pretty much near crying, and that would have never happened at that time. I would just be sitting here straight, sort of seeing his pain and trying to be polite and trying to express some kind of compassion, but that compassion wouldn't have been felt because I would have been so afraid of his pain.
Yeah.
Ex-
I would have been
Makes
afraid of
sense.
his pain because I was so afraid of my pain that I would have had no ability to be with his pain. So I would just kind of go numb, but
Yeah.
try to be polite and compassionate, if that makes sense. And that is also really heartbreaking, to be honest, now that I sort of think about it, you know?
You're
Yeah.
reminding me that, yeah, Matt and I have talked about compassion before, and that true compassion only develops from the ability to be with hurt and to be with pain experientially.
Yeah.
That's what cultivates true compassion. Otherwise, it's going to be forced, constructed compassion that doesn't really feel congruent in the heart.
To
Yeah.
be with it,
Yeah.
to be with her in a way where there's no separation from it, like there's no,
Yeah.
as we spoke about at the start, like the subject witnessing the object from a detached place, rather than fully feeling it and experiencing it. And like I really resonate that sense of like, and just kind of performing compassion.
Performing, yes,
Yeah.
performing
Performance
compassion.
compassion.
And performing spirituality, like, as
Right.
well. It's
Yeah.
like, in this empty space, but the body's just like completely traumatized, like just locked up and bracing
Yeah.
for impact at every
Yeah.
moment. But like I'm beyond it and I just perform
Yeah.
spirituality, like, and I'm not a
And you
teacher
call
or
yourself,
that,
you might
like,
call
but
yourself beyond and under.
yeah, yeah, yeah. But it's kind of like that superiority complex, steps in, and
Big
like you said,
time.
no, based on pride, and like it's just this, and we just perform these things, they're
Mm.
not embodied, and we can, like as you said earlier, Maggie, we can do that at various
Yep.
stages, like all the way, like it's a um different kind of work that we're talking about, like of intimacy with feeling, with the human. And like it's tremendously difficult, like, tremendously painful. And it's like I totally get you
Yep.
know, why we don't
Mm,
do it. Like why
yeah.
it's like, why it's not a thing really in spiritual circles. And because it's like,
Yeah.
why would we want to go there? Like, but it's the only way we can actually fully experience, we could say the divine and human become one, and that's just another kind of romanticized story and way of putting it, but for lack of better terms,
Mm-hmm.
where we can experience our wholeness and our humanity, like rather than, trying to be free from the pain. It's like we can start to be free to be human, like
Mm-hmm.
Free within the
yeah,
pain rather than freedom from it.
yeah, yeah, not just freedom from it, and
Mm,
like all of these are developmental stages, it's like there's nothing wrong with someone who's negating and
Yep.
coming back to that I point, feeling
Mm-hmm.
into the I am and negating, calling things illusion. Because, if we don't do that, then we're just stuck in the story. Like,
Yep.
we are identified with the story, but what we're talking about is different, it's not, it's the capacity to fully experience it without being identified with it. Like, it's not who I am. It's
Yeah.
I don't even know what word to put on it, but and so there's these developmental stages that we go through, and none of them are wrong. All of them are needed at various times. They all
mm.
serve a purpose.
I think of the notion of spiritual maturation rather than realization. I prefer
Mm-hmm.
that idea because it is a never-ending process of maturation and part of that maturation is kind of learning how to integrate all parts of ourselves. But often at the beginning of the journey, there is that kind of we utilize spirituality to feel better, which
Yeah.
is as you're saying before, it's an innocent process, but that's what the ego tends to do with most spiritualities. It turns it into a new set of shoulds and standards that I should live up to. And I think of it as the spiritual superego. We
Yep.
develop any new piece of spiritual knowledge turns into a new set of shoulds. I should be more spiritual. I should be more compassionate. I should be more awake. I should be more mindful. I should be less reactive. And it just becomes a new set of whips that we whip ourselves into. And that's
Yeah,
one of the spiritual traps, that we develop a spiritual superego, and we keep
Big
treating
time.
ourselves the same way as we did previously to the spirituality where we were beating ourselves up, but just at a different level. My basic premise is we're all going to be a little bit deluded for the rest of our lives. Like, I don't think we ever get to a point where we're non-deluded. And so I that's humbling for me.
Right?
I think it was Dogen, the founder of one of the main schools of Zen. I think like it was him that said, delusion exists after full enlightenment, and it's
Yeah.
it's
Yeah, oh, that's for sure.
not that I even know what full enlightenment is. Like, I don't even know what that word means anymore.
Yeah, exactly
But
same
it's
here.
just
Yeah.
like whatever the various shifts that you can go through. Like there, in my experience, like there's delusion. Like I still experience delusion. Like I'm certain that everything I've said tonight, that it's still happening in certain ways that I haven't seen, like it's not like I've gotten to this point like, oh yeah, I do all this perfectly. Like, it's like, no, like I'm certain there are still ways, like that my mind still tries to escape
Yeah.
certain
I think
experiences.
you're probably just a little bit more deluded than me, Matt, don't you think?
Probably, just a little bit, and a little bit
Where
humbler.
I'm
where
only
that
joking.
puts me, I have no, that's actually scary. Oh my God. Um, but
No, I'm definitely
oh,
the most deluded here.
I mean, really, the other topic is the healing traps, which is in and of itself massive. So I'm not really sure whether we can go there, but because there's a whole other sort of shift now where people realize, okay, the awakening alone is not gonna sort my neurosis, or like, the
Yeah.
awakening alone is not gonna wipe out all those patterns. I actually do have to do some shadow work. I actually have to look at my trauma. But then it becomes another fixation. Do you see what I
Yeah.
mean? So I
Yeah.
For
don't
sure.
know if you want to, is there a way to say, without going into like all the bits and pieces of what that might look like?
It follows the similar themes, like, you know,
Mm-hmm.
like the healing journey can have traps where it's like it's coming from that same unconscious sense of brokenness and there's something wrong with me, dot, 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 and I need to fix it. And
Yeah.
that movement of trying to fix ourselves actually perpetuates the core belief that I'm broken, that there's
The
something wrong with me.
self-improvement project.
Yeah, exactly. And we can never get out of that, like, because there'll always be something else to work on. And so it becomes again a self-perpetuating loop where it's based on often unconscious ideals and the belief in an endpoint, again, just
Mm-hmm.
like awakening process. So it's actually no different, follows the exact same themes, very similar ways that our mind deludes itself into thinking this is going to get me to like becoming a perfect human, awakening process like a saint or a sage, or an enlightened master or ascended master or whatever, like where it's like in the healing process, it's the same thing, but we might just use different words. It's the self trying to fix itself, or the mind trying to get away from something that's here right now, and often it's that deep pain, and so the healing journey isn't actually about healing anything in the sense there's like it's not about fixing anything, but it's actually learning to experience ourselves as we are.
Mm-hmm.
And like if we can learn to start to experience it ourselves as we are, that expectation of an outcome, like we kind of get humbled into giving up hope, for things to be better than what they
Yep.
are. Like,
Exactly. Yep.
it's like, humbled into giving up hope. It's like that's what it kind of comes down to. And that kind of starts to crush the belief in an endpoint, the belief that I'm going to be better
Mm-hmm.
than
Mm-hmm.
what I am now, and experience is going to be better than it is right now, more spiritual, I'll be more healed, I'll be this, I'll be that. But
Yeah.
it starts, we start to fall into the reality of our experience, as it is. And like, so it's the same thing. Like it really is, like, but there is 1,000 other traps that,
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I can give some examples from my own personal experience because that's exactly what I did. I thought if I go to that next workshop and do that next bit of inner child work,
Mm-hmm.
then I'll be free, then I'll be whole. And I think I was addicted to personal development for a long time because unconsciously I had the belief that if I do more shadow work, do more trauma work, try harder, then I'm going to be reach this ideal spiritual state that I was seeking. So you
Right.
can go both ways. You can either go towards your trauma with this attitude of I've got to heal my broken parts to get whole or to feel better, or I've got to avoid it. So both ways are kind of ways of trying to fix ourselves with and seeking this idealized state. And I think Matt gave voice to that just then beautifully. And
Yeah.
I'm reminded of, to me, what's really important is not what we experience. That doesn't matter in the end. It's how we relate to it. It's all about our relationship to it, to our experience. And if we can show up to our experience without trying to change it, like Alma says, take your hands off your experience. Leave your experience alone. Stop meddling with it, for God's sake.
Mitigating. Yeah.
Just let it be, and let yourself be exactly where you are, which doesn't involve pushing for something to happen. Like all you have to do is show up to this moment. And he says the fastest way to become who you are is to be exactly where you are. And I really love that saying. It's like you're not trying to get anywhere. You're just being open to the truth of your experience in this moment. And I think that's the most profound journey of them all. It's not the journey from here to there, but the journey from there to here. That's that's the true journey. You know, actually how to just really be in this moment and surrender to the experience and to relate to it with curiosity and kindness and compassion. And that's so for me, I notice more and more I'm just letting go of this whole concept of awakening and enlightenment, and it's becoming less and less meaningful to me because the real journey is not the destination, it's the journey itself, and it's about how I relate to my experience. And that's the most important thing. Can I show up to my experience with kindness, curiosity, and compassion, and humility and courage? And I'm trusting that. I'm learning more and more to trust that process. And I don't know where it's going to go. I've got no idea where it's taking me. No friggin' idea at all. But I love that because that's very freeing.
I just opened a whole Pandora box with this question because there's just that is another really fascinating topic. So maybe if you two are open to it, we could do it some other time.
Sure.
But Matt, do you have anything else that you'd like to say that came through before we
I
wrap
just
up?
like what just to emphasize what Noel said, meddling with experience. I actually heard, I think it was Almas who said, twisting God's arm. Another
Yeah,
way of
that's
saying
right.
meddling with
Wow.
experience. Like when he said that was really profound, like, twisting God's arm. Like it's like, yeah,
Yeah.
that's exactly what we do, and like the manipulation of our experience and the kind of way we contort ourselves, or the way the mind contorts itself and tries to change, what's happening right now. Like when we really start to see that's what's happening is what is happening, and it is an inevitable fact. Like it is an inevitable fact what we're experiencing right now. Like just in that clear seeing, then there's
Yep.
more of a softening into it because it's like, well, there's no escape anyway. Like we are here, like in this experience. We can try every trick in the book to try to meddle
Yep.
with it, change it, fix it, get away from it, blah, 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 blah. But when you really see the futility and experience the futility of that,
Big
like,
time.
that kind of, it's like being pinned to the cross,
Yep.
that's kind of how I experienced it, like just
It's
like
a real
being
surrender.
crucified, it's like, it's like something, and it's like, I'm here.
Which is why hopelessness, as terrifying and painful and scary as it may sound, is actually a massively important part of this process
Oh,
because
exactly. Yeah.
it's exactly where it's at least for me, hope was like a lifeline, literally like a
Yeah,
lifeline. Like
exactly.
if you
Yeah.
take the hope away from me, I might as well be dead. You know what I mean? So it was
Yeah.
this profound. So
Hopeless.
so I totally get that. But yeah, gosh, I know I said it already, but I'm gonna say it again. Thank you so very much for this conversation and for your time. Gosh, I mean, I will gladly watch it myself, again, sort of just to like hear you again and all the things that you shared that I am absolutely sure that many of the people who watch videos on my channel are going to find very, very useful, or at least I very much hope so. So thank you so much, both of you.
Thanks, Maggie.
Thanks, Noel.
Really appreciate your questions and reflections